Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, by the time you watch this, I will be in Scotland. And one of the things we'll be exploring in a lot of detail once we get to Orkney is Viking history. In other words, the history of the raiders who came from places like modern-day Norway and Sweden and Denmark. And they left their mark, and they left, to this day, their influence. And much of Orkney's history, but also its culture, is heavily influenced by that. So I thought it'd be a great time to talk about some Viking history. And there's a video that was suggested to me over on Patreon, and on as well on our Discord server, and this is from 5 years ago. It's a video from Epic History called "What Made the Vikings So Dangerous? 5 Viking Deaths and What They Tell Us About the Viking Mindset." Long title, but it tells you everything you need to know about that one. I'll put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary if you want to. And I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Darren Wilson for your support on Patreon. If you want to learn more about how to support the channel on Patreon, I've talked a lot about that. I won't go into it again right now, but it means a lot. The link is down in the description. Let's dive into this one. Laughing shall I die. I love that.
AD 793. Raiders appear without warning off England's east coast. They land at Lindisfarne, known as Holy Island, where they slaughter monks, steal treasure and holy relics, then vanish back across the Dark Sea.
And that, when we think of Viking raids on what is now the island of Great Britain, but also they raided Ireland as well, so the British Isles, that's kind of the modus operandi we think of, but it didn't always look like that, right? You know, appear without warning, raid, kill religious people, steal their treasures from the churches, and then disappear back across the water. It did happen like that, you know, and next year we're going to Ireland on a group trip, and one of the places we're going to go to is Glendalough, which is amazing. And one of the things you see there is a big tower that they could use in part to watch for potential raids, so they had time to prepare. So they didn't get taken by surprise at a place like that. But, you know, a lot of times they stayed in places that they went, and a lot of times they negotiated, and, you know, they went to places you don't think about. They spent a lot of time in France. They raided as far away as other parts of Europe. It's incredible, really, when you think about it. And, of course, North America.
It was Western Europe's first traumatic encounter with the Vikings. For 3 centuries, these pagan pirates from Scandinavia terrorized Europe, raiding, extorting, enslaving, and ultimately conquering. They roamed deep into Russia and the Mediterranean.
Yeah, this is a great point. Look at the cross. I mean, they're not going by water. They're not going in their longboats, landing on the shore, raiding, and then getting out. They're crossing. I mean, this is a trek that's taking you months at minimum to make.
Even daring to attack what they called Miklagard, the great city, Constantinople.
Incredible.
Viking longships and a mastery of seamanship and navigation gave them the ability to strike at will, with the element of surprise.
This goes to show us that you don't need to do what other people do. You don't need to be a traditional military power to have success. You find your niche and you do it really well. You just excel at that thing, and then force your enemy to adapt and try to learn how to counter that. And then you need to adapt, and that's, you know, that's all a part of life.
But their enemies, including Anglo-Saxons and Franks, themselves belonged to proud warrior cultures.
True.
Was there something more that gave the Vikings their lethal edge? Professor Tom Shippey is an expert in Viking history and medieval literature. He believes their success can be attributed in part to a unique mindset. A mindset revealed in the Vikings' own sagas.
We have a great many sagas written in the Vikings' own language, which is Old Norse.
That's a great point he makes about the sagas. You know, whether or not these sagas are true, and a lot of what we know about Viking history comes from some of these sagas, like the ones about Ragnar Lothbrok, which gave us the Vikings TV show. But it does, whether true or not, it gives us a tremendous insight into how they thought and how they saw the world.
The famous sagas of Icelanders, but there's also Konungasögur, That's sagas of kings. There's Fornaldarsaga, sagas of old times. These are looked on with suspicion these days because they were written hundreds of years later, mostly in far-off Iceland. And people say, oh, well, you can't rely on those for history. They're fiction.
Don't discount it.
Well, actually,
I say this all the time. Just because something is oral history and it was written down hundreds of years later does not mean we should automatically assume that it's false. We should question it. We should keep that context in mind when trusting it as a source of truth, but don't immediately discount it.
A lot of it is fiction, and some of it's fairy tale, and you can pick that out quite easily. But a lot of it isn't fiction. I think it's based on family memories.
Yeah,
and people who can't read and write often have good memories, and they take memories seriously and they pass them on. Leaving the fact and fiction question aside, they do all express, I think, a very characteristic and consistent attitude, which I call the Viking mindset.
So I want to pause right here and take a real big aside, and just bear with me for a minute because, and I've explained some of this before, but I think it's worth repeating because I think it'll help give some context to how we should view things like these Norse sagas or view things like, text that was written down by the Romans about their origin story, stuff like that. Two examples from my own personal research that I've done that I think illustrate this beautifully. One is, growing up, I was always told that my great-great-grandfather, a guy named Peter William Gearhart, it was pronounced Gayhart down in Kentucky, that he was part Native American. Now, a lot of people have such stories of, oh yeah, my great-great-grandfather was Cherokee Indian, that kind of stuff. And I'd always heard that story. But as I researched, I couldn't find any evidence at all that he was Native American. And I thought, well, there's no way that people just flat out made this up. This story came from somewhere. And at some point, I found out that he was a part of a fraternal organization called a Red Man's Club. Now, it sounds incredibly racist and cultural appropriationist to us today. But it was a fraternal organization that white men joined, and they would dress up like Native Americans. And at his funeral, they wore Indian headdresses. And this, of course, would have communicated to younger members of the family that there was something to this, right? And so then my great-grandmother, who was 8 years old when her father died, would have remembered that detail from his funeral, and that's probably what got passed down to her children, including my grandfather. So you can see how a story can get passed down that has a kernel of truth but was misinterpreted and didn't mean what people thought it meant. Now, there's another example. When I first started dating the woman who would become my wife, I started researching their family history, and her father told me that he had a great uncle who had been one of Lincoln's bodyguards, and I immediately dismissed it as being nonsense. Then one day I discovered the fact that Governor David Todd, who was from here in Youngstown, Ohio, visited Lincoln early in the war and was appalled to find out Lincoln had really no bodyguard to speak of. There was no Secret Service, things like that. So he asked permission to raise a company of soldiers in which one soldier would come from each of Ohio's 80-plus counties. And one soldier would be chosen from Trumbull County, and one from Mahoning County, one from Cuyahoga County, and one from Jefferson County, and one from Washington County, etc. And I found out that the man from Mahoning County, where I live, was a man named Emery Swank, who happened to be my future wife's great-great-great uncle. So that one was absolutely true. He was a part of this unit called the Union Light Guard, who served at the White House and were messengers and at times were bodyguards for the president. 100% true. Got passed down through oral history in a family where they knew nothing about their family history, didn't know the guy's name. So that just goes to show you. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
And that's really quite distinctive. Two of the distinctive things about it are the fascination with scenes of death, with famous death songs, with famous last stands, all that kind of thing. And the other is the very characteristic sense of humor, which I call, I'm afraid, it's not good sense of humor, it's bad sense of humor. It's the kind of humor which is really rather cruel or grim. And
gallows humor.
I mean,
when your life is warrior it's when your life is fighting and death, you have a particular dark sense of humor. If you ever met somebody, or if you have somebody, some of you watching maybe, works in a funeral home. People who work in a funeral home are some of the most compassionate and wonderful and warm and loving people you will ever meet. But they'll also tend to have a pretty dark sense of humor about death. But you have to, because when your life is death, that's what you do. I had a friend in high school who grew up in a funeral home, and I remember the first time I visited their house, her parents made jokes to me like, hey, you want to spend the night? We've got lots of beds. Most of them have lids, stuff like that. Or like when I went down we were going to dust, I was going to help them clean up the parlor a little bit before a viewing they were doing later that day. And they said, don't worry, there's no body in there, that kind of stuff.
We'll look at 5 famous death scenes from the old Norse sagas to see what they can tell us about the Viking
Ragnar.
mindset.
I saw the snakes.
Many tales are told of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. His own saga says he was the son of a Swedish king and slew a dragon, but that when he sailed to England seeking further fame and riches, he was shipwrecked off the coast of Northumbria.
And so remember, this is a time when England is not a united kingdom at this point. You've got Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia. Well, East Anglia, you've got some smaller kingdoms that appear here and there. You've got Kent. You've got, obviously, Northumbria is the one that's right on the front lines for the Vikings. And then you've got various kingdoms of Scots as well.
He was taken prisoner by its Christian king, Ella, who
did not have a
decided to
good ending
inflict
himself.
a terrible death on the famous Viking. He had him thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. As he faced death, Ragnar called out to the king.
The famous line from the death of Ragnar is Gnithia mundu grisir ef galtar hag vissi. The piggies would grunt if they knew how the old boar died. The word Gnithia, it means grunt, but it also kind of sounds like grunt. And I think you could actually translate it, go oink oink. The piggies would go oink oink if they knew how the old boar died. It's a joke, and the joke is actually on King Ella, because there's this barnyard vocabulary, piggies and oink, but what it means is, my sons are going to come, and what they do to you won't bear thinking about.
And this is one of those examples of there may be some elements of truth to this story about how Ragnar, there's debate about whether Ragnar was even a real person in the traditional sense. But assuming he was, and assuming that some of these events unfolded the way that they did, the person who's writing these sagas later, who knows about what some of Ragnar's sons, like Ivar the Boneless, are going to do when they come to England, and knowing the fate that's going to come to Ella himself, where he's going to famously, according to the sagas, be given the blood eagle. This could be somebody writing and attributing a phrase to him that's kind of apocryphal in nature, like, oh yeah, my sons are going to get you, because they know that that's what ends up happening in the story later. It's kind of a foreshadowing.
It's a threat. The funny thing is, although it's a late saga, this story about the piggies was known earlier, because it was actually quoted by a Latin chronicler.
Ah.
He'd heard about the piggies, he got the phrase right, he just didn't understand what it meant. He thought Ragnar was saying, if my sons knew about this, they'd come and rescue me. But he didn't. He wasn't hoping to rescue, he knew he hadn't got any hope. He was saying, my sons, when they hear about this, then they'll avenge me.
Yeah.
And of course they did.
Ragnar's death in a snake pit is almost certainly invented, but his sons, the piggies, were very real. In 865, the Ragnarssons landed in England with a great army.
Can we just agree on one thing, that these Vikings had incredible names? Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Halfdan Ragnarsson. I mean, again, if you've watched Vikings, you know some of these stories and these people already.
Rampaging across East Anglia and Northumbria and killing King Ella. Is there any link between these historical events and the saga tale of Ragnar's death?
England was invaded by men who were very early on identified as the Ragnarssons. And my suggestion would be that the whole story of Ragnar's death in the snake pit was made up later on in order to motivate the invasion of England.
It's possible.
Why did the Ragnar sons invade England? They did it to take vengeance for their father.
It's quite possible Ragnar was killed on orders of King Ella. It could have just been that he was beheaded, or that he was run through with a sword. It might not have been anything as interesting as thrown in a pit of venomous snakes.
And so you make up a story about the death of the father and the way that the vengeance was motivated.
I'm not familiar with this story. Oh, this is early. Wow.
According to legend, Rolf Kraki was a great Danish king of the 6th century, a Danish King Arthur. His great hall stood near Lera, where he entertained a famous band of champions. But many sought his throne. His own cousin, Hjörvarthr, made a surprise dawn attack on the king's hall. After a desperate last stand, Rolf lay dead, surrounded by his champions. Only one man survived. Vögr, the weakest
That's all you need to tell the story is one, right?
man in Hrolf's court. He'd been the butt of all jokes, even when he'd sworn to avenge Hrolf's death. Now he was hauled before the new king, Hjörvarthr.
Rolf is dead, and all his champions are dead as well. That's the right thing to do, except Vögr, who is dragged out of a pile of bodies. And for some reason, Hjörvarthr thinks it would be a good idea to get a pledge of allegiance from Rolf's last surviving champion. So they get...
If history tells us anything, you don't leave him alive. You don't leave someone alive who can get vengeance later.
Vögr, and he is hauled up, asked to swear allegiance to Hjörvarthr, and Hjörvarthr gives him his sword to swear allegiance on.
Which he turns and kills him.
Bad idea. Vögr picks it up, runs Hjörvarthr through. That's the end of Hjörvarthr and the Skilding dynasty. And of course, Vögr is immediately killed. But he has fulfilled his vow.
Right, and he went out like a boss, right? I mean, that's the kind of story that you could absolutely see being passed down.
So it's another example, really, of the Viking love of, shall we say, wit, of being able to turn the tables in a funny kind of way. Once again...
And listen, if you know anything about history, you know that these kinds of things absolutely happened, right? This is not a story that's outside of the realm of what is possible, because some of the most absurd stories that exist are absolutely true stories. If you look at some of the stories that we've talked about on this channel, if you made them into a Hollywood movie, no one would believe it was true. They would think that's too ridiculous to even make into a story. So we shouldn't discount anything for being like, oh, that would never happen. Whether it did, another story.
Ragnar's joke was on King Ella, and Vögr's joke is on King Hjörvarthr. Very funny, in a sort of way.
Legends about King Hrolf come from a tumultuous period of Europe's history, traditionally known as the Dark Ages. But recent discoveries suggest the tales of King Hrolf have a basis in fact.
As they often do.
King Hrolf is the Danish King Arthur. They lived at about the same time in the early 6th century. For a long time, the story of King Hrolf was regarded rather like the story of King Arthur, it couldn't be true. But then the archaeologists, alerted by a chance discovery, started looking at the traditional site of King Hrolf's court, which is now the small village of Lera in Denmark. And much to their surprise, they discovered the site of one enormous hall after another. I think they have now found 6 of them, all through the Viking and pre-Viking era.
So this is why I tell people all the time, do not confuse absence of evidence with evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found proof of something doesn't mean it's not real. We just haven't confirmed it yet. And we're finding stuff all the time that rewrites what we know about history, that confirms things that we thought were legend or myth or just weren't sure about. So who knows what we'll find tomorrow? It's not rewriting history, it's confirming it. It's better understanding what we know. It's sometimes, rethinking things, like because we made assumptions based on evidence. And now new evidence says we need to make new assumptions.
So that part of the story at least was true. Later, once upon a time, Lothbrok really was a major power center in the early Viking period.
The Jomsvikings
Vikings
were a legendary group of Viking mercenaries, picked men bound by a code of honor. According to Old Norse sagas, they had a fortified base on the Baltic coast at Jomsvikings. In 986, they were recruited by the King of Denmark to subjugate Jarl Håkon of Lauder.
Yeah, this is important to remember too, is that while they were raiding different places, this is not a unified group of Vikings, right? They're different kinds of Vikings. There are different groups. They often got labeled as the Danes by the English people. But there are different groups, and they're just as often fighting each other for power as they are raiding other people.
At Hjörungavágr, they suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Jarl Håkon and his son Jarl Eirik. Vikings rarely offered or expected mercy. After the battle, the Jomsviking prisoners were lined up for execution.
The beheading started, and the Jomsvikings, who had a code of their own which forbade them to express fear at any point. One of them, for instance, said he would not kneel down to be beheaded. He insisted on standing up and being beheaded from the front so that people could see that he did not flinch from the blow.
And there's a little bit of that trickles down into later history in places like, for example, in England when King Charles was beheaded in the aftermath of the English Civil War. It was January when he was beheaded, and he was wearing a shirt, and he was worried that people would think that him shivering from the cold was a sign of him being scared or nervous, and he didn't want that to be projected, and so he wore an extra shirt to stay a little warmer so he could project that sense of bravery and calm.
He does kneel down to be beheaded, and he says, I'm a bit worried about my hair. I don't want to get blood on it. Could somebody very kindly take my hair and pull it over my head, and then the beheading can go on?
He's going to pull back.
But as the axe falls, he jerks his head back, and the falling axe cuts off the hands of the man who's been holding his hair. Well, that's bad sense of humor for you. What a...
There's movies that show this happening in fictional stories. I mean, all the way back to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, you have a story like that where Robin, played by Kevin Costner, puts his hand down to have his hand cut off for theft. And he pulls it back at the last second, and the guy who's holding his hand is the one who gets his hand cut off.
Joke. Everybody laughs like nobody's business. In particular, actually, Jarl Eirik, who thinks he's never seen anything so funny in all his life. It was such a good joke, he says, well, we'll let you off. And the Jomsviking very properly says,
no,
can't accept that unless you let all the others off too.
Right.
So the other Jomsvikings are then all spared.
Really?
Well, you know, obviously complete fiction. No, can't believe a word of it. Yeah, about 15 miles away in that direction from where we're standing, just recently, they were digging for a new road, and they came upon a pile of skeletons, about 50 odd, and a separate pile of skulls.
I think this is the one we just talked about in a recent video.
All the skeletons had been beheaded.
Wow.
And analysis showed they were all male, they were mostly young, and they were all Scandinavians.
Wow.
Okay, so there was a mass beheading, just as described in the saga, and furthermore, several of the men had been beheaded from the front, just as in the saga. So, once again, what appeared to be complete fiction turns out to have some corroboration in hard fact.
I mean, that one, especially the exact incident, doesn't have any corroboration in hard fact, just that sort of thing happened, but I think we already understood that.
Olaf Haraldsson, King of Norway, the man who'd one day become its patron saint, had been a feared Viking before he became a Christian king. In 1029, the Danes, supported by local jarls, drove Olaf into exile.
And this is an interesting time because we're talking 36 years before the Norman conquest of England. But this is also a time when you're getting the last real rule of England by what they would have called a Danish king.
When he and his followers returned the next year to reclaim the throne, they were met by a huge army of hostile pagan farmers. Retreat was not an option for Olaf. On the morning of battle, the restless king rose early and asked his poet, Thormod, to sing to him, to pass the hours before the army gathered.
Nice. I mean, never been in combat, don't know the first thing about what that's like, but as a historian, I've studied a ton of it. And you can only get so close to what it feels like by studying it, not experiencing it. But obviously, you can only imagine how your mind, we know how it is anytime we have something important that we're doing, how nervous you get and how you can be processing in your brain and thinking and overthinking and all the things that go on. You can only imagine what that's like when you know you're going into a significant battle.
Thormod immediately starts to sing the Bjarkamal, which is actually a poem supposed to be sung by Böðvar Bjarki on the morning of the last stand of King Hrolf, which we've discussed already. Dagar is opkomen, dunja hana fjadrar, maules vil mögum at vinna elfidi. Vaki eok vaki, vinna hövuð, allir inni utstu aðils of sinar. Haar in hathgrepi, Hrolfur skjötandi, uitum góðir menn, there is ekki flygja. Vekka útrat vini, neat vífs runum, vek útr höðum, Hildar at Leiki. The day has come up, the roosters clap their wings, time for the wretched serfs to do the heavy labor. Wake now, wake, company of friends, all you best ones of Athil's people. Har the hard grip, Hrolf the shooter, men of good birth, they who do not flee. I do not wake you to wine, nor the whispers of women. I wake you to the hard sport of Hildar.
That's fantastic. But if that's, like, I've not really read much Norse sagas writing, but that's fantastic. And if that's what it's like, I need to dig more into this.
It seems a strange choice for a poem because it is in a way a suicide poem. It's saying we're all going to get killed. Is this a good morale raiser? Yeah, they're Vikings.
I was going to say, it absolutely is. I'm going to die a good death. I'm going to go to Valhalla. That's kind of the goal for any great Viking, right?
It's great. Everybody says, super song, just the thing. Let's get started on the battle.
But the odds were stacked against King Olaf and his men. Thormod's song of brave men rising to face certain death proved a premonition.
The battle is lost. King Olaf is killed fighting in the front rank and is brought down by a series of spear and axe blows. And as you would expect, all his chosen companions, all his bodyguard are killed around him. But Thormod the poet, survives. Not his fault, he just happens to survive. And at the end of the battle, when it's all over, he laments that he has not been allowed to join his king.
It's just a different mindset, right? I mean, I survived. Everyone else got a glorious death, and I am stuck here alive to tell about it.
That moment, an arrow comes flying from nowhere and hits him. And the obvious implication is the dead king sent it. He sent it so as to give Thormod his wish that he could join Olaf. And Thormod then composes a poem about his own wound and dies without quite finishing it. He dies on his feet, still reciting the poem, but he doesn't complete the last line, which fortunately is completed for him by a bystander. And the bystander is the teenage Harald Hardrada.
Oh, no way. Harald Hardrada. That's very cool. Stamford Bridge. And I'm really disappointed that when Norway and England played each other in the knockout stage of the World Cup, they didn't bill that as the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And I know there's implications with that because it's also the name of the stadium where Chelsea plays, but, you know.
Harald Hardrada grew to become King of Norway and one of the greatest Vikings of all.
Oh, awesome story.
His adventures led him east to the city of Kiev, where he served at the court of Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise. Then to Constantinople, where he commanded the Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Emperor. As King of Norway, Harald the Hard Ruler was brave, cruel, and acquisitive, and in 1066 set his sights on the English throne. But King Harold Godwinson marched north to meet him, moving so rapidly he caught the Vikings off guard at Stamford Bridge.
The thing about the Battle of Stamford Bridge is that Harald Hardrada and his invasion force, they were caught napping. Harold Godwinson marched very quickly up to York and kept on marching through York, and the first thing the Norwegians knew about it was seeing the glint of weapons approaching.
Yeah, and again, much of what we know about that battle, we have English chroniclers who write the story, obviously, because it's all part of that larger 1066, where you then have Harold Godwinson going south to fight at Hastings against William of Normandy. But we did a video on Harold Hardrada, so look for that and check it out.
But it was a hot day, and the Norwegians had left their heavy equipment, especially their armor and their shields, down on their ships.
Yep.
So they were actually facing an armored force without their armor.
Heedless of the risk, Hardrada advanced into battle at the head of his men. According to the Heimskringla sagas, written by the Icelander Snorri Sturluson, he composed poetry even now.
Framgungum veri fylkegu, brunju löser und blåregjar, Hjalmar skina, hefkat mina, nu ligger skruð vart at skipum nedri. Forward we go in formation, without armor against blue steel edges. Helmets shine, I don't have mine. Now our gear lies down with the ships. I think it's quite good, actually, the poem. But
I mean, and again, this is one of those things that historians debate. Did they really leave their armor down at the ships and march inland without it? And a lot of people think there's no way that's true. But it just seems like a very interesting detail to put in there if there isn't some element of truth to it, because you don't have that story being told other times. So why specifically this event?
Who was a terrible poetic snob, thinks about it for a bit and says, no, that was too simple. And then he produces another poem in a much more complex and high-class meter and says that's much better.
Hardrada threw himself into the thick of the fighting, unarmored, wielding his sword with both hands. Fearless and defiant to the end, he died with an English arrow in his throat, alongside most of his army. He is often called the last Viking.
According to the saga, the Norwegians arrived in 400 ships and the survivors went home in 24. The Anglo-Saxons let them go. That, you might say, put an end to ideas that England could be conquered by Norwegians or Danes or Vikings.
Though it's fair to say that William the Conqueror himself is the descendant of Norsemen, of Normans, though he's mostly French by that point because he's the product of multiple generations of intermarrying between the Normans and the French.
The Viking era then was over. Harold Hardrada, you can only say, well, he died like a Viking, making jokes, making poems,
awesome,
lashing out with both hands until he was killed.
But can these poems really be attributed to Harold Hardrada?
I don't see there's any way that the poems could be genuine. After all, who was there to note it down or remember it? Practically none of the Norwegians survived. I expect Snorri Sturluson made them up himself to help his story out.
Possible.
But they're good poems. They express a kind of, not regretful attitude, but it's sort of rueful. Yeah. Well,
So I don't know the answer to this. Maybe somebody can put it in the comment section if you go look it up yourself, and I'll probably look it up later myself too. Whether any of the English chroniclers who wrote down the events of Stamford Bridge mention the Norwegians not having their armor in this battle.
Well, we're not going to win this one. They caught us this time. Oh well, that's the way it goes. We will just have to fight it out. And that strikes me as, again, a characteristic Viking attitude.
The Battle of Stamford Bridge had unintended consequences, paving the way for another invader to become King of England.
The Battle of Stamford Bridge was, of course, a catastrophe. It was a catastrophe for the Norwegians, but it was a catastrophe for the English as well, because they took very heavy casualties as well. And 3 weeks after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, they fought the Battle of Hastings.
Which nearly was a victory. I mean, England nearly won that battle. England probably should have won that battle. And certainly without Stamford Bridge, the odds go up tremendously, because now you're talking about Harold Hardrada not being there to inflict casualties, and Harold Godwinson having significantly more men, which means he's going to greatly outnumber William the Conqueror's forces.
And you can't help thinking, if they'd been at full strength, they'd have won.
Almost
On
won
the
anyway.
14th of October 1066, the English army suffered a crushing defeat at Hastings, and Harold Godwinson was killed. England's new king, William the Conqueror, was himself descended from a Viking adventurer.
Yep, Rollo.
The Viking Age was at an end. For nearly 3 centuries, Europe had been terrorized by Scandinavian warriors whose attitude to death gave them a dangerous edge.
What finally strikes me about the Viking mindset is not so much the defiance in the face of death, that's what you expect heroes to do. It's actually the matter-of-fact attitude, and also the liking for some kind of a joke. You can actually use vulgar words, like Ragnar in the snake pit. You can play dirty tricks, like Vugger with his Pledge of Allegiance. Or you can play practical jokes, like the Jomsviking getting the guy's hands cut off. Or you can nitpick about poetry, like Thormod and Harold Hardrada. All these say, death is coming, it's certain, but actually I'm going to see what I can do to make this memorable. What it makes me think is that when it comes to Vikings, you can kill them, and speaking as an Englishman, we did, over there. But frighten them,
No.
that's not going to work.
Right.
They're always going to come back at you. You're not safe until the very last one of them is dead.
All right, that was really good. I like the change of pace for Epic History, having a historian on, sharing his expertise. That was really cool. I should mention, since I mentioned looking this up, there are no English sources that mention the Norwegians not wearing armor at Stamford Bridge. In fact, there's a reference to armor being worn, and that is the story that we have written down from a relatively close to the time period, a 12th century addition to what is known as Manuscript C, which talks about that famous lone Norwegian axeman who's standing at the bridge and holding the bridge on his own, that the way he was defeated was that an Englishman floated under the bridge and pierced him with a spear underneath his mail shirt. So that would be armor, at least of some kind. Maybe not heavy armor, but he certainly had chainmail on. So take that for what it's worth. But I thought I'd go ahead and add that. I want to thank Odin the Wanderer, perfect timing for that to be someone I'm thanking, as well as Ethan Willer for your support on Patreon. Check out the videos that I'll place up on the screen if you want to learn more. Thanks for watching.